Andy Burnham blasts Tories for playing poker with people's lives in furious speech. The Greater Manchester mayor accused the government of walking out of talks after refusing to provide a £65 million bailout for ailing businesses and workers. Andy Burnham has accused the government of walking out on talks for a financial bailout for Greater Manchester if it goes into Tier 3 restrictions. The Greater Manchester mayor savaged ministers for failing to provide the minimum sum of £65 million needed to avoid a winter of real hardship under Tier 3 restrictions, which would plunge the poorest into poverty and homelessness. He said civic leaders had reduced their original demand of £90 million for stricken businesses and for workers to top up furlough payments. Mr. Burnham then reduced it again to £75 million, then £65 million, but the government refused and walked away, with reports it would only offer £60 million. By contrast, the government has already spent more than £200 billion on the coronavirus crisis. In a day of drama, Boris Johnson was due to give a press conference at 5 p.m., where he was expected to impose further restrictions on the area against the will of local leaders. In a furious speech to reporters, Mr. Burnham accused ministers of playing poker with places and people's lives through a pandemic. He blasted, "Are they piling pressure on people to accept the lowest figure they can get away with? Is that how they're running this country? Is this a government committed to leveling up this country? What we've seen today is a deliberate act of leveling down." He said £65 million was the absolute minimum to prevent poverty, to prevent hardship, to prevent homelessness. Those were the figures that we had, not what we wanted, but what we needed to prevent all of those things from happening, he said. But the government refused to accept this, and at 2 p.m. today they walked away from negotiations. In summary, at no point today were we offered enough to protect the poorest people in our communities through the punishing reality of the winter to come. Even now I am still willing to do a deal, but it cannot be on the terms that the government offered today. Mr. Burnham blasted ministers for scrimping on the cash bailout, saying, "At no point today were we offered enough to protect the poorest people in our communities through the punishing reality of the winter to come." He said Chancellor Rishi Sunak's whatever is takes attitude has gone. "It's you'll get what we will give you," he said. And that isn't acceptable in the middle of a national crisis like a pandemic. The row between Northern leaders and Westminster has been running for days, with tensions boiling over earlier when Communities Secretary Robert Jenrick called time on the talks. Government sources indicated Greater Manchester will now be placed in Tier 3 lockdown.